to shift things around a little bit and look at it in another way. What we need to do is start with the question about what sort of economic growth can we do if we do infrastructure right? What sort of levels of resources is our community going to be able to provide over a 30-year time frame? Have a look at what sort of infrastructure we can provide. Where will we locate that? What's the first investment? And then try and make the planning and land use be compatible to leverage the most out of the infrastructure that we got. That's going to drive you into a scenario where you try and get more out of the existing. Can we use technology? Can we use equipment? Can we do things to get more out of it? You know, why can't we double the number of trains per hour on the rail system, for example? Is there a way to do that? Let's go find it. And once you start thinking about infrastructure that you can provide, and then being disciplined and strong about the way that you can equate land use with that, I believe there's a real potential to reduce the gap that we've got. Now, what that requires is an integrated transport plan to drive it. It requires a discipline to meet the requirements of that integrated transport plan. And it needs a lot of active involvement with your community so that they understand what you're trying to do and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve for your community. Now, you have to accept the fact that resources are limited, and you need to find a way to get that strong compatibility over time between planning and land use and your transport systems. Out of planning and land use anyway, as far as capital works are concerned, transport is the most significant investment. And if you're careful about developing your transport system, we know that people can walk within 800 metres of a railway station. We know there's a pool for a hospital. We know there's a pool area for a school. And if you're very strategic about those sorts of things and look for overlaps for those sorts of development, it can become a real pointer for where you want the more higher density development to take place in your city. I think it's got some interesting prospects, and it might influence the way we do planning in the future.
So there's, David, you have a different problem. Not so much one city as three cities in a region. You know, we think of southeast Queensland, or Pacific City, as Jim Kennedy used to call it, the amorphous mass of, you know, Noosa to Coolangatta and all stops in between, filling up with people who've largely left Melbourne but didn't bring their tarmac with them, didn't bring their community library. Their infrastructure stayed behind, but they went with them. You've got to replicate it. That challenge requires an awful lot of planning, an awful lot of combination of land use planning and transport planning. Do you, as a transport planner, transport deliverer, have enough control or input yet to the compendium, the land use release, those issues? Are we getting any better at putting transport and planning in the one room to achieve one outcome instead of dual strategies going necessarily in different directions?
Look, I think the clear answer to that is yes. I think one thing that the Queensland Government's done exceptionally well working with local government is the move we made probably in '97 from integrated regional transport planning to regional planning. And I think with the release of the constant releases of the South East Queensland Regional Plan have been really, really good. You know, it's not only been around transport, but it's been, you know, the comment was made this morning, energy, water, you know, social infrastructure, schools, hospitals, all of those sorts of things. And I think one of the things we have done very strongly is to drive that process. And it's not only in South East Queensland. I think it's recognising the role of regional planning in the whole state. And I think that's one thing we've been very successful in doing. You know, whether it is passenger transport on the Sunshine Coast, you know, Gold Coast, we've recognised very quickly that, you know, it's the same old story. There's not a silver bullet to solving congestion, but actually having a really good mass transit system. And, you know, this is where we've seen with that planning, the vision, you know, the Australian government coming in with the state government and local government on the Gold Coast to deliver rapid transit. You know, that is a great outcome. And, you know, we'll now move forward with the private sector to actually make that a reality. But we've got that vision up and down the seaboard. But it's the same issues we have, you know, like other states, you know, our productive economy is actually in regional Queensland, and it's how we actually move our commodities, our resources to port and beyond. And I think they're the constant challenges, and I think, you know, some of the ambitions of Infrastructure Australia are some ambitions from a planning perspective that we really share, and actually nationalising that approach, or the thinking around that approach, I think will be very useful. But, you know, there's no question, I think the success in South East Queensland has been the regional planning process, where our transport planners work extremely closely with our land use planners, and I think that's been a success.
John, I know you've got no problems, or you won't have any, because you got most of the federal money out of the Building Australia Fund. But maybe learning from that, and we keep being told Victoria was best rewarded in some ways because government was seen to big tick on the combination of combined planning and a discipline that's gone into that. Take us through, let the rest of us share in some of the magic that has been Victoria, how we get some of the money in future years. So give up some of your competitive advantage for us now. What was the model? What is the strategy that's driven that has seemed to have been most rewarded in a way by those above?
Sure, thanks Chris. Can I have slide 112 please, from the back?
You bought slides.
Yeah, no, it breaks up a forum. Look, there's probably a few things about Victoria. One is in 1996, the previous Liberal government basically put roads and public transport together in the Department of Infrastructure. And for 6 to 7 years, we also had land use planning in that department. So we've been used to working with one another for 13 years. 12, 15 months ago, the government actually moved to slim down the Department of Infrastructure to a Department of Transport. And one of the drivers of that was that over the 3 years around that time, we had 10%, 12% and 13% growth in our metropolitan rail system. And one of the smart things we've been doing really over the last decade is that it's not just a matter of doing the big projects. What we have done is that we've done 3 significant tram extensions. We have done 2 electrifications, and what happens with electrifications is that basically you take a country train off the network which might carry 300 or 400 people max, you put a suburban train on the same train path, you're carrying 800, 1,000, regrettably sometimes more. We're currently embarking on our 3rd train electrification. We've done hard yards. We're putting in 2 triple track exercises at present to create paths, one out to Dandenong, one to Werribee. There have been a lot of smart but smallish investments that we've really tried to drive to actually maximise the capacity of our rail system as part of dealing with congestion. One of the other big things we've done, and what I've put up on the screen, is a slide from a document called Melbourne at 5 million, which is where we think the population might be heading by 2030. Now, to put it in perspective, Melbourne is currently adding more people than it's added since the late 1960s. From 2001 to 2008, Melbourne's been adding more people than the Sydney metro area. Over that 7-year period, we're actually adding 150,000 more. The plan with Melbourne at 5 million is essentially to try and get 53%, I think, is the target growth accommodated in the urban growth areas, and we're doing some adjustments to boundaries are under discussion at present. 47% is targeted for middle suburbs, infill and inner city. We've been doing really well in the inner city, and that's a projection. You know, the city of Melbourne has changed dramatically over 20 years. But what's really significant about that north and west growth, if you look at it, is that all of that is basically only in a range of 25 to 40 kilometres from the city. So you're talking in Sydney terms no further out than Blacktown. It's an area in which you can access all the attributes of the city without being so far away that commuting and those sorts of things are impossible. If you look at regional rail link, that's where it's going. What we're doing is basically enabling people from Ballarat, Bendigo and Geelong to get into the city more quickly through this dedicated regional rail line. Coupled with that, we are freeing up at least 12 metropolitan train paths to accommodate these growth areas, and obviously